دایی یه فرصت خوب حالا پشت مدافع خداداد عزیزی توی دروازه گل برای ایران خداداد عزیزی باز هم روی زمین گشت سردار آزمون به توی دروازه سردار آزمون گل به نام آزمون برای ایران
بزنه کریم انصاری گل توی دروازه کریم انصاری دروازه پرتغال باز شد
علی دایی سام توپ توی دروازه
یه اشتباه حرکت از کوچان نژاد فرصت برای کوچان نژاد توی دروازه گل برای ایران.
Welcome back to Bezan podcast. My name is Arya Allahverdi. This will be a two-part podcast in which we will speak about the Group A draw that took place last week. Iran was in the same group as South Korea, Iraq, UAE, Syria and Lebanon. For part one of this podcast, we'll be joined by various journalists and experts from each of the countries. For South Korea, we'll have Paul Neat from the K-League United podcast. For UAE, we'll have Wael Jabir from Adaf. For Iraq, we'll have Hassanane and Balal from the Iraq Football Podcast. Syria, we'll have Saeed, Joudeh from winwin.com. And finally, for Lebanon, we'll have Ali Zeineddine from Lebanon Football Guide. In part two of this podcast, we'll have our own discussion about the Iranian national team, and we'll also speak about Skocic staying with the national team, as well as answering some of your questions on social media. But for now, subscribe to us on the platform you're listening on and enjoy the episode.
85,000 نفر در ورزشگاه از فرصت برای تیم ما ضربه توی دروازه کوچان نژاد گل میزنه در ششمین بازی ملی خودش چهارمین گل ملی رو به ثمر میرسونه.
Okay, I'm joined by Ali Zeineddine from Lebanon Football Guide, here to speak about the Lebanon national team. How you doing, man?
Hey man, how are you?
All good. Appreciate you taking the time to come on Bezan. I want to ask you about the Lebanese national team, but before that, can you just explain to the fans your own social media account, Lebanon Football Guide?
Yeah, I've been working on this since 2016. I'm also a journalist on Al-Akhbar newspaper. The idea was just to put the light on the Lebanese football for the foreign people who are living outside of Lebanon, because there are more like 15 million Lebanese people living outside of Lebanon. So there is a lot of followers out there, and then it was a hobby. Then it became a business somehow because of the websites and the ads and things like that. And we are doing fine right now. One of two Lebanese football accounts that are working very well.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that, and hopefully we can have you on the podcast more often when we play the matches in September. Okay, first thing I want to ask you, Ali, is about the Group A. Give us your reaction to being in the same group as Iran, South Korea, Iraq, for example.
Well, it's a tough group, but I think it's easier than the second group. It's actually a surprise for us to be here. It's like South Korea withdrew, and then we had to win one game, and maybe 4 points will be enough for us. And then we lost the two games against Turkmenistan and South Korea. And then the other results were good for us, and we qualified. We didn't prepare to be here, so it's a surprise for all of us, like the coach and the federation and fans, the players. And I believe we are not prepared for this. There's only 2 months, and we don't have a manager right now. But the fans are happy because we are playing against the best teams in Asia, and I believe the players also are happy because they will play against stronger opponents, and we don't think we will qualify, but it's good for us to have trainings. If we can make a new team before the Asian Cup in 2023, and we have also the Arabic Cup in December.
Yeah. And yes, it's a good chance for Lebanon to actually play some matches regularly, I suppose, and of course, like you said, the Asian Cup is coming soon, so they want to try and prepare themselves the right way. So playing against Iran, Obviously, being one of the higher ranked teams in Asia, how do you think the game will go? And finally, where do you think Lebanon will finish in the table?
I believe it's gonna be the hardest game, home and away, because like all the teams in our group, we have won against them in the past 10 years. We won against Iran 1-0, I believe in 2013 with Rudahandar's header, and we won against Korea and Iraq and Syria and UAE, but we faced Iran 4 times in these past 10 years. We've lost 3 times, and it was big losses, 5-0 and 4-1. Wasn't good for us. South Korea, we played 3 times in Beirut, and we won once, and came up with draws 2 times. So we know them very good, but Iran is the strongest, I believe. Even though they lost 2 games, two games in the past qualifications, but they came back stronger, and I believe the games will be the hardest games, even in Lebanon. We are not playing in our home, not in Beirut, like in Kamini Shamayel Stadium. We're playing inside, and that's a weak point for us because the fans more likely to be in Beirut, not inside, since it's the capital. So we don't have really, we might even not play there. So we don't have really like good points for us. And Iran have a lot of professional players in Iran and outside. And actually, Lebanese players living or playing outside of Lebanon are coming to Lebanon, and the league Lebanon is really weak. So all the games will be hard, but I believe Iran's game will be the hardest. Now, where we're gonna be? Well, the last in the group, or maybe better. I believe we will win a game or two, maybe a maximum. Depends on our luck. Depends on other opponents' luck. What we're gonna do? If we're gonna have a good coach, maybe not Lebanese coach, and prepare well. But I believe like it's a good chance. Like I said in the beginning, it's a good chance for us to prepare for the Asian Cup. But if we get like 5 points, 6 points, 7 points, that will be enough for the Lebanese fans.
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope you guys do well, because Lebanon seem to have some good players, but they need to maybe get some success in the national team. Okay, thanks for coming on, Ali. I appreciate your time, and I hope to speak to you soon. All the best.
Thank you and good luck.
رو تو پسر میگذارن، این قیچی برگردونه توی دروازه. یه گل تماشایی از مهدی طارمی حساب کار رو 3-0 میکنه و مهدی طارمی رو 2 گله در این مسابقه. یه گل فانتزی و تماشایی زده شده از مهدی طارمی، ضربه قیچی برگردونش و حالا خوشحالیشو میره تقسیم.
Okay, I'm joined by Saeed Joudeh, Syrian football journalist. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you? How are you doing?
All good. Thanks for coming on Bezan. Let the listeners know about yourself and what you do for Syrian football.
Hi, good evening or good morning for all your listeners. My name is Saeed Joudeh. I'm a sport journalist specializing in football. I'm working as a chief editor in winwin.com. I have my own YouTube channel. It calls Footballizer. You can find me there. I'm speaking about all the stories and the news about football. Also, you can find me on Instagram, also on the same name at Footballizer.
Fantastic. Excellent. Okay, so regarding the Syrian national team, first of all, you guys are grouped in the same group as Iran, with South Korea, Iraq, Lebanon, and UAE. Give us your reaction to that group.
Actually, I found it so balanced group. In football, you have all the national teams have the same chances to reach to the final, but you have to take care of Iran, South Korea. Maybe they are the most chances is for them, because when we are speaking about the big five in Asia, you are speaking about Iran, about South Korea, about Japan, Australia, and Saudi Arabia. This is the big five. Now competing in the same group with UAE, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. I think it's a balance for these for national teams. UAE, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon have the same chances to reach to the finals, to the World Cup in Qatar 2022, but they have to prepare so good for maybe now all the national teams are focusing on their matches against Korea and Iran, but actually the small, if we can say, the small nationals teams as Syria and Lebanon will be the obstacles. They will put the obstacles for maybe Iran and South Korea. I think Syria. We have Iraq and Lebanon and west of Asia confederation, and they know each other's. Also with Iran, I think Syria has to win 6 points from Lebanon, the same from UAE. The most difficult matches, as I spoke, will be with against Iran, South Korea, and she has to wait for a gift from the other teams in the group.
And obviously you said that, obviously Iran being one of the stronger teams. How do you think the
course.
game will go in Tehran and also back home in Syria?
Okay, let me remember all the listeners that until this moment, until the 3rd of July, Syrian national team does not has a coach after the Tunisian head coach Nabil Maloul quit or decided to quit his job with the Syrian Federation. And this
was that before or after the friendly we played in March?
No, it was after, because
okay.
The coach Nabil Maloul played for 5 friendly matches. He drew in one and against Uzbekistan, or he won against Uzbekistan, and then he lost all his matches against Iran 3-0, against Bahrain with the same result. After that match, the journalists, the fans started to speak about the level of the players, about how the national teams appears against the big teams of Asia. To be honest, in football world, the chances seems equal, but on the pitch, no. We all know that Iran national team has the advantage to get the 6 points from the Syrian national team. Unless waiting for the name of the coach, maybe he has some tactic to face Iran.
And finally, where do you think Syria will finish in the standings in this group?
As I told you, if the Syrian national teams succeeded to get 6 points from Lebanon, which is not easy, most of our supporters thinking that the Lebanese team is the weakest point in this group, and this is actually not true. If they can get in the minimum 15 points from this group, I think they can be on the second. They can compete for the second or the third place. If they got less than this, I don't think that they will be in the third or the fourth place.
Oh, fantastic! Hopefully, you guys can maybe get to third place, so that maybe we can finish second or first.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I appreciate your time. and I hopefully that we can speak again soon when you guys have the game with us in September. And thanks very much for coming on.
یه پاس در عمق فرصت برای بچهای ما هست. سردار آزمون گل! سردار ایرانی حساب کار 1-0 میکنه. 35مین دقیقه گل برتری برای سفیدپوشان ایران. جونم به این ایران. حالا گل برتری.
Okay, I'm joined by my good friend Hassanane and Balal from Iraq Football Podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm very well, Arya. Thank you so much for having me back. Who thought we'd be back so soon after the last podcast?
Yes, we were discussing whether or not to do another collaboration afterwards. Maybe we would do it, but luckily we have grouped together. So what was your first reaction to that?
I was a bit happy, if I'm honest with you, but with time and reflections, I think it's a good group. It could have been a lot worse. It could have been a bit better. I was discussing it with one of the Iraqi players that play for the national team. He says I'm crazy. He thinks the other group would be a lot better. But I kind of disagree with him. I think the group that we got, Group A, I think for Iran it's brilliant. I think for Iraq, it does give us a chance, but I think it's more of an outsider's chance. Between playing Iran and Japan, with all due respect to you guys, I'd rather play Iran. I think Japan, that's 6 points guaranteed to lose. With Iran, there's a chance we could take something away from those games. Iran are undoubtedly the better team. But, in games like that where it's such a big rivalry, it really depends on who turns up on the day. And we've proven that we're capable of beating you guys previously. I'm hoping we can pull something out of the bag again. But, like I said, take nothing away from Iran. They're a very, very good team. I think on the second group, South Korea, the second seed, South Korea, they've not looked amazing. I think we have a chance taking something away from them. But I think Australia, you could argue that they would have been the easier game, and I would understand that. But, Iran, South Korea, I reckon on the day we could take something away from those games. Then you look at the other teams, UAE, they're a team that's hit and miss. They've looked very, very good in some games, but in other games they've looked atrocious. So I'm hoping we can take some points away from them. We've played in the UAE a lot, especially when we weren't allowed to play in Iraq. So I don't think the away games would feel too away, if that makes sense. Then you have Lebanon, who I think we should be taking 6 points there. Anything less than that would be completely unacceptable. Syria is the odd one where you probably definitely would rather play Oman. Syria, they're a well-organized team. They know how to defend properly. And I think that's where Iraq will need to fix up. Our biggest problem recently has been our biggest problem has been breaking down defenses. And against a team like Syria, if we are serious about qualifying, we need to be getting those 6 points. But it's going to require a lot of improvement in our attack. And the thing is, for Iraq, there's so many question marks right now. Number one, we don't know if the manager's going to still be there for the new qualifiers. He hasn't officially left, but his contract has expired. We haven't hired the replacement. And there's been a lot of talk about him not wanting to stay and the Iraqi FA not wanting him to be here. But again, like I said, there's a lot of lack of clarity there. On the other hand, I think one of the other issues is, are Iraq going to be able to play their games at home? Or is it going to be held in a neutral zone? I know that there's all this talk about VAR, and Iraq might not be able to have VAR ready in their stadiums. What does this mean for the games that we play, etc.? So it's not going to be easy. And I think without expats being reintroduced into the team, I really can't see us qualifying, if I'm honest with you. And it pains me to say this, but I think if I'm being honest with myself, I can't see us finishing top 3, maybe 4th. And it's hard to argue we deserve better than that, the way we've been playing the last couple of games.
What do you think they have to do then to sort of finish, let's just say, 3rd place? I mean, obviously, Emirates are not a bad side. As you said, they're not the best, but they're not that bad either. What do you think they have to do? Obviously, expats could be one of the things, but from now until September, the Iraqi FA, they've got a couple of things they have to try and do, bring in a new coach. I don't know if they've already done that or not. You know, friendlies. What do you think the kind of objectives are?
It's really hard to say. The first thing we need to do is figure out the situation with the manager. Does he stay or does he go? Are we hiring someone new, or is he going to remain as manager and have the complete support of the FA? There's no point keeping him, and he's always looking over his shoulder, knowing that he could be fired on a cuff, basically. So we need to make a solid, determined decision. Do we keep him or do we let him go? That's the first thing. And the second thing, I think, as you mentioned, is the expat situation. We need to improve the squad in terms of the quality and the depth. One of Katanish's biggest flaws as previous manager was that he had about 12 or 13 players he trusts and nobody else. And I think the biggest issue we're going to have in this next round is that those games, they're going to be challenging and they're going to be back-to-back. It's all good beating Iran when you had to play Cambodia before then and you could rest your players, or you could play at 60% and get a win. But when you're playing Iran and then South Korea the next week, you need to have a lot of depth in your squad. You need to have players that can come in and be fresh and that are at optimal fitness levels, that are match fit and ready to go. And if I'm honest with you, the players playing in the Iraqi league, they don't meet that criteria. You have players playing in Europe that their fitness is always 100%. They come into those games having trained at the highest level, and they're ready to offer a much better performance than players that are playing in the Iraqi league. And like I said, that's not the only issue. The issue is that from those players that Katanish picks, it's only a select few that he brings on. And as you saw with the Iran game, substitutes were late because he just doesn't trust the players he has on the bench. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a huge issue.
All right, man. Listen, I appreciate your time. Hopefully, after when the games are played, I think they're in September, so we'll have you on for then. But for now, I appreciate your time and hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you so much. I wish you guys the best of luck in the campaign. Hopefully, Iraq and Iran do qualify side by side, but we'll wait and see.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Whip back in, onside! And it stands! Zeineddine for Iran! Top spot in the group, snatched at the death! Unbelievable! He's onside for sure.
And Zeineddine just where he needs to be and nods it home. That is, well, it's harsh on the UAE.
Okay, now I'm joined by Wael Jabir, a good friend of the podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Very good, Arya. How are you?
All good. Thanks for coming on. Just explain to our listeners about your own work and how they can find you on social media.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I write about Middle Eastern football, focused on the UAE and Saudi Arabia a lot. You can find my work on places like Arab News, like the Asian Game, and a few other websites. And you could follow me on Twitter on Wael Jabir, and mainly Iron Ahdaf, which is a digital content provider based in Dubai. So we provide digital content for football clients across the Middle East.
Perfect. And that's AHDAAF, Ahdaf. Perfect. So obviously you live in the UAE, live in Dubai, so we've brought you on to speak about the Emirati national team. Can you kind of give a little bit of a reaction to the group that was announced last week, and how you think UAE will fare against likes of Iran and South Korea?
Yeah, it's an interesting group, to be honest. I think there are positive and there are areas where it could have been better. I think definitely the perspective from most people in the UAE was that it was good to avoid Japan, even though in the previous qualifiers, the UAE actually beat Japan in Tokyo. But there is a sense that, of course, Japan are probably the strongest side in Asia at the moment. So there was a bit of relief with that. Lots of people, I think, would have preferred to face Australia than South Korea. And I think, yeah, with Iran, for me, the case is that it was either Iran or Japan. So I think a lot of people were more comfortable with facing Iran than Japan. think from obviously the other side of the draw for me is that at the bottom end you had of course the option between facing Syria or Oman. I think lots of people would have preferred to face Oman. Syria can be at times a difficult opponent to face, even when they're playing away from home. Between Iraq and China, I don't think people would make much of a difference. Personally, for me, I think I would have preferred China to Iraq. Iraq can be a tricky opponent, and I think fans of Iran would know that from previous encounters with them, that it's a difficult team to face. So overall, I think it's a balanced draw for the UAE with, I would say, more positives than negatives, really.
And then obviously just speaking on the UAE national team, so how have they been getting on recently in the qualifiers leading up to this draw? I know they've got a decent squad, that's why they were in the third pot, but what have they kind of improved on?
Yeah, I think it's been a game of two halves, so to speak. Obviously, the first part of the qualifiers back in 2019, it was a bit of a mess. And thus, in that first half, the UAE lost to Thailand and lost to Vietnam, which two results which were not expected. And since then, there was a lot of managerial changes. But interestingly, once the qualifiers restarted, the UAE were back where they started, because in 2019 they had appointed Bert van Marwijk. He led them through the first half of the qualifiers, and he was actually sacked in December 2019. From then on, two different managers were appointed in 2020, but both were gone before the qualifiers restarted, and they decided to reappoint Bert van Marwijk, which is an interesting tale. But I think the second half of it, obviously, it was a big boost that the UAE hosted the rest of the group, and from then on, it was smooth sailing. They won their 4 games. They scored 15 goals in the remaining 4 games, and I think the team has improved significantly. I think it was a wise decision to reappoint Van Marwijk again, and I think he benefited from, or he learned from, the mistakes of the first half of the qualifier. So he made some changes to the team, especially at the back, and I think that helped the UAE significantly.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, one of the things that comes from this draw is the question of who's hosting the competition. A lot of people were thinking that maybe if we got Saudi Arabia, they would be the hosts, but obviously UAE are now in the group, so there's a chance that they might host it. What's your kind of knowledge on that?
Yeah, I think maybe we need to take it a step back, because I'm not sure it's going to be hosted in a centralized location. I think there is a good chance that it will still be home and away, especially obviously the deciding factor here being the FIFA windows, because obviously the qualifiers need to be completed by March next year. So the question is, would there be an opportunity for the teams to be gathered in a centralized location for, I would say, 3 weeks, which is, or maybe even more than that, whichever the duration that they will need to run the whole stage. But I think if it's going to be played over 3 or 4 different FIFA windows, I don't see a point of it being hosted in one location. So for me, I think I'm inclined to believe that it will be home and away.
Yeah, I think we hope so as well as Iranian fans. So having said that, having the games be home and away, how do you think the UAE will fare against Iran?
Yeah, I think honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I think Iran is too strong for the UAE, and I think whatever results the UAE gets against Iran, if they do manage to snatch a point or two, that would be a huge advantage. But honestly, I don't see it happening, and I don't think it should matter to the UAE. For me, the way the group is set up, the games against Iraq and Syria will be the critical ones. The way I see it progressing, I think the first 2 spots are between Iran and South Korea. I'm not expecting any surprises there, even though obviously in the earlier phase of the qualifiers, we've seen Iraq beat Iran, we've seen Lebanon hold South Korea to a draw. And I'm expecting some of those results to happen. I think still Syria, UAE, and Iraq, they will take some points from the top 2 teams. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be smooth sailing for Iran and Korea. But I think come the end of the qualifiers, it will be Iran and South Korea in the top 2 spots. So UAE's focus for me is to go through as third place and then go into the playoff.
So yeah, so I was just going to ask you that then. So you believe that UAE will finish third?
Yeah, I think they have a huge advantage because in the last couple of qualifiers, the UAE were seeded in fourth place, and then that meant they would have, in addition to one of either Iran, Korea, or Japan, Australia, they would also have Saudi Arabia in the group, which made things a bit complicated. But the fact that they were ranked third here is a huge boost to their chances. And I genuinely believe if it comes down to a playoff between the UAE and Australia, so I know we're discussing this group, but looking at the other group, I believe is going to be Japan and Saudi Arabia who go through. So I think in a playoff between the UAE and Australia, the UAE have a good chance, especially having Van Marwijk, who's a former Australia coach, in charge.
Yeah, exactly. Wael, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on Goal Bezan. And hopefully you can have you on for the next matches coming up in September.
Thank you very much, Arya, and good luck to Iran and all Iranian fans.
پاس برای جهانبخش، یه فضای عالی برای رضاییان، سه نفری حمله میکنن. خود رامی پاس عالی، یک ضربه، حالا گل برای ایران. سردار ایرانی دروازه کره ها رو باز میکنه. عالی بود حرکت بچهای ایران و سردار دروازه کره رو باز کرد. ایران 1 Korea Junubi 0.
Okay, now I'm joined by Paul Neat from the K-League United to speak to us about the South Korean national team. Paul, how you doing, man?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me back on the show.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. First thing I want to ask you, obviously, is about your own podcast and all the work that you guys do with K-League United. How can people find you?
Yeah, we are at K-League United on Twitter, we're on Instagram as well, and on Facebook as well. So, yeah, do check us out. We have a weekly podcast. It usually comes out every Thursday, but you can watch it live. Ryan, the host of the main podcast, he does that live on Tuesdays usually. But there's been quite a lot of midweek games, and obviously with the Asian Champions League now, it's been a bit difficult to do that. So, but when things get back to normal, yeah, they'll be back to live episodes on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, and hopefully when the Champions League starts back, we'll maybe have you one of us on the podcast as well if you face an Iranian team.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
for sure. So just obviously, Iran for the third time have been grouped with South Korea. What's your first reaction to Group A?
I thought that it was a good draw, with the exception of Iran, obviously, because Korea's record against Iran isn't very good, to put it quite politely, actually. Just 3 wins, I think, over the 16 meetings. But the rest of the draw, I think, has been quite good for Korea. I think they did well to avoid Japan and Saudi Arabia and also Australia. I think it will basically come down to the head-to-head with Korea and Iran. I would expect both teams to pick up comfortable results or wins against the other nations in that group, and it might just come down who can break the others down when the 2 teams meet.
Yeah, and obviously, as I said before, we have faced you guys. This is the third time that we're going to face you guys. But what has changed in the South Korean camp? Obviously, we know that you still have some of the best players in the team, like obviously Heung-min Son. But what's changed over these last couple of qualifiers?
Well, I think obviously the manager's changed since that first time around. Well, since the last time around. In fact, I think there was 2 managers in charge. Stülecke, the German, was in charge, I think, for the first meeting in Iran. And then there was Shin Tae-young, who took Korea through to the World Cup for the second time around. So obviously there's been a different change in terms of the philosophy and the mentality. Paulo Bento is the manager now. And he's got this philosophy that he's very, very, not rigid, but sort of confident in his beliefs that Korea should be playing this certain type of system. He only brings in players who he thinks can add to that. There are some players that he's left out. So, for example, Kim Bo-kyung, he was the MVP in K-League a couple of years ago. He played for Ulsan and Jeonbuk. He's not really been able to get back into the full national team setup. He has his favourites, but I think that is quite good in one sense, because it just shows that he has this belief in the players that he has. He doesn't really call up too many different players. Obviously, with what's happened recently with COVID and stuff like that, and certain travel restrictions for the European-based players, he has had to bring in some sort of new faces into the squad. But he doesn't really venture too far out from the sort of core 25 players that he usually calls upon. And it's I think under the old regime, there was never really much evidence of a clear plan. The players didn't really, I don't think, know what was expected of them. It was a little bit ad hoc. It wasn't really very cohesive. But under Paulo Bento, there's a clear philosophy. He likes to play good football. He likes to play expansive football. And they've looked good in some games. Obviously, South Korea have always had this issue of trying it hard to break teams down and make it difficult for them. But in certain games, like, for example, in the qualification matches just a few weeks ago against Turkmenistan, they won 5-0, as you would probably expect. But the press here were very impressed with how they played. Obviously, they won 5-0. You would expect them to sort of score a few goals against Turkmenistan, but they played very well in doing so. And I think when he has his full team available, because he hasn't really had all of his squad available for one reason or another for the past few international matches that he's been having to lead the team into. Once he does have his full squad available, you will kind of see just how good they can be on their day.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know how strong they are, and when we did play South Korea in the last couple of qualifiers, it wasn't easy. I know we did win some of the games, but it wasn't easy. How do you think South Korea will fare against Iran this time around?
I think I suppose it depends where the games are playing. If it's going to be, the sort of normal way of playing home and away, then obviously I'd be quite concerned going away to Iran. Korea don't normally get much away from home against Iran. And I just think that it will probably be quite low scoring affairs like they were last time. I just think Iran are the team really that Korea will have problems against. They find it difficult to break them down. I don't think that they're really used to that kind of style. And if they can play them at home and away, the home game, I think under this management, they should do better than last time. That 0-0 draw that we talked about at the tail end of last year, they should be able to do better than that just because they create more chances now. But away from home, I would be quite concerned that it's going to be a very, very difficult fixture.
And, we have a fairly, you could say, easy group, if you want to put it that way, having drawn with all the sort of lower ranked teams in each of the pots, excepting Iraq was the only one who was the highest pot team. Where do you think South Korea finishes? Second place?
Probably, yeah. I think it will be second unless they can get a good result away in Iran. Most of the teams that they're going to play, they have got the better record against. Iraq is probably the only one where it's only slightly. They've I think played 6 and won 3 and lost 2, so they slightly edge it. But with the others, I think you'd be fairly comfortable. I mean, against Syria, so they've got a good record there. They haven't lost against Syria in their last 6 meetings. Lebanon, they beat only just. It was a 2-1 win at home in the last game of the qualifying in round 2, but they made it very difficult. They, as you would expect, Lebanon sort of got men behind the ball, made it hard, and they, in fact, Lebanon took the lead in that game, and it probably was the best thing for Korea because it woke them up a little bit. Then they had to come out and be a bit more expansive and try and be on the front foot. But yeah, I think most of the teams, really, their record is pretty good. They only lost once to the UAE away from home. I just think most of the opposition Korea should be fairly comfortable against, and it's only really Iran that would be the major issues.
Yeah, hopefully Iran do keep that issue and they actually do get the result. But I appreciate your time, Paul. Hopefully we'll have you on when the qualifiers actually get played.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you again. Cheers.
Okay, thanks very much for listening to this episode of Bezan podcast. I hope you enjoyed the various journalists and experts on the countries that are going to be in the same group as us. We'll be back very, very soon with part 2 of this episode, where we'll speak about the Iranian national team as well as answering some of your fan questions. So make sure you're following us on social media and subscribe to us on the platform you're listening on, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Hi, it's Dr. Craig Duncan, and you're listening to the Bezan podcast.